As congressional Democrats have family discussions over President Biden's political future, House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries has told worried lawmakers in his party that he plans to relay their concerns directly to the president himself. President Biden, for his part, has spoken to a select group of Hill lawmakers, including the Congressional Black Caucus, which has voiced its support for Biden. But a similar statement of support from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus reportedly caused tension among members who felt it was released without the group's complete buy-in. The president has also spoken to certain individual lawmakers, but as of right now, he is not planning to call into a meeting with Senate Democrats tomorrow afternoon. Instead, Biden plans to send his campaign chair and senior advisors to speak with the senators instead. Joining me now is Jackie Alemany, congressional investigations reporter for The Washington Post. Jackie, thank you for being here. I think a lot of us who don't cover the Hill are kind of confused about the dynamics here. One of the reasons we're focused so much on the Hill is if there is a sort of engine for either the Keep Biden In movement or Take Biden Out movement, it seems to be sort of headquartered among the elected members of his party. And I wonder what you think transpired between yesterday, when it seemed like the movement to oust Biden had sort of gone quiet, and this morning when Nancy Pelosi came on our network and suggested that the sort of deliberations were very much not over.
Yeah, Alex, it's certainly been an emotional roller coaster for these lawmakers since they returned to Washington, especially in the House, as they've been really agonizing over this debacle in the weeks since Joe Biden's faltering and disastrous debate performance. But if the stakes couldn't have already been higher, Nancy Pelosi certainly raised them this morning with her comments on Morning Joe. They were subtle, but deliberate and very precise, and a really significant reframing of a delicate but urgent conversation that is happening not just amongst lawmakers right now, but everywhere in the party for Democrats. But what Pelosi really did was she sort of reframed this conversation. She is an institutionalist at the end of the day. So her making these comments was highly significant, especially as a number of lawmakers who were privately grumbling about Biden and his unwillingness to hear from members, hear their concerns firsthand, and maybe reconsider his decision. This is someone who they heard from who might now have opened the door for people to sort of have the flexibility to potentially change their minds, especially when it comes to Biden's performance on Thursday, when he's going to have this press conference after NATO. There's been a lot of talk on Capitol Hill about whether or not he's going to be able to deliver a performance that is going to finally allay a lot of the concerns that we're seeing. And there is sort of an expectation that he's not going to be able to. And in that case, what is the path forward? There is a feeling that the former speaker is now making paving the way for lawmakers to have an exit ramp.
Do you have a sense of the sort of dynamics between the Democrats in the House and the Senate on this topic? Because up until literally a few hours ago, when Peter Welch became the first senator to say Biden shouldn't be at the top of the ticket, it had felt like this. Typically, the Senate was taking a sort of more deliberative path on this. But that sort of seems to have flipped in the last 12 hours with Michael Bennet and John Tester and Peter Welch publicly calling for Biden to step down. And then sort of there were pockets of support for Biden among the Congressional Black Caucus, at least, and to some degree among the Congressional House Caucus. Like, how are those dynamics playing out between the upper and lower chamber?
Yeah, well, if there is one commonality between the two chambers, it's that both chambers have been feeling like, in the absence of robust communication and response that is satisfying to lawmakers in the House and in the Senate, that they've lost even more confidence in Biden and the operation around him. They were expecting sort of a full court press, individual calls, outreach from Biden and his team. They haven't seen that. So one House aide told me today, and I know that this is felt similarly in the Senate, that if one of the top leaders in the party called the White House switchboard and tried to get through to President Biden, they're not sure anyone really could at this point in time. All of these concerns have been compounded in both chambers by the awful polling that lawmakers have seen in the few days. I don't think it's a surprise that you've seen a handful of New York lawmakers today in the House suddenly tweak their previous statements and change their minds. Representative Pat Ryan came out and said and was the eighth or the ninth House lawmaker to call for Biden to make a change and to give up the top of the ticket. So I think this lack of communication is something that both sides are struggling with. I think that there's also this dynamic that both Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are dealing with as well, which is there are still some divisions. There are still some members who feel like, yes, Joe Biden is an imperfect candidate, but he's never been impressive. And this is our lot. And by coming out publicly and continuing to criticize him, we're just making our electoral chances worse. We'll see, though, just how far those people are able to hold their ground within their caucuses.
Yeah, but Jackie, when you talk about holding their ground, it feels like the people we hear most from, and again, it's sort of hedged conversations and hedged statements, are the people who appear skeptical of Biden staying at the top of the ticket. I'm struck by the lack of sort of passionate support for this president, given especially what the White House says is, a vast number of voters out there who still support him. I mean, does that surprise you?
It doesn't. I mean, I know we've talked a lot about this public versus this private conversation, but I will say overwhelmingly, my colleagues and I have spoken to dozens and dozens of lawmakers this week. And even the ones who are upbeat publicly have articulated concerns in private. There is this sort of resignation that if Joe Biden stays atop the ticket, that he is facing defeat against President Trump. I mean, as one senior aide told me point blank, we have no path to take back the House if Biden stays at the top of the ticket. And that's why Nancy Pelosi's comments this morning, I think, were so significant, even though they were quite subtle. She's someone who, again, lives and dies by the House. And at the end of the day, her priority is the House. So she didn't feel that the House was that Democrats were in danger of missing the opportunity to recapture the House. I don't think we would be seeing this commentary and sort of this milquetoast support for Biden from her.
Jackie Alemany with the Washington Post. Thanks for your great reporting tonight, Jackie. It's really helpful.
Thanks, Alex.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.